Hello, my name is Sean Moberly, and today I'm talking about raising boys. I expect this to be a series, as there is way more that can be gone into than what I can go over in a single video. I'm talking specifically about raising boys for two reasons. First, because I don't have any daughters as of this recording, so I have much less experience in that field. And second, because, in my opinion, which may change in the event that I have a daughter, the father's special role to a daughter is to be an example of a good Christian, man, husband, and father. It's the mother's job to teach her how to be a good woman.
Sean Anigans.
Now let me clarify that real fast. Yes, the father does have more responsibilities to his daughter than just being a godly example, but those other responsibilities are not specific to daughters. That is, being a spiritual leader, disciplinarian, and so on applies no matter what variety of child you have. So now that that's out of the way, raising boys. Today's video is about the one piece of advice you'll not get from most Christian sources. Teach your boys how to be violent. I told my wife the topic of this video, and her response was the same that most of yours will be. Boys don't need any help being violent, they already have that down pat. And my response to you will be the same as my response to her, which response, by the way, got her to say that this might be my most important video yet. It's true that boys are naturally and instinctively violent, which I believe is part of the God-given responsibilities men have to be protectors, and if they aren't taught how to be violent, which includes being taught when to be violent, that violent instinct will lead to them being predators instead of protectors. Your end goal with teaching boys how to be violent is for it to be said of them what Mr. Beaver said of Aslan. Safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. I'm not going to go on about how to teach your boys how to be violent, because what worked for my dad probably won't be what works for me, which probably won't be what works for you. Instead, I'm going to talk about why to teach your boys how to be violent, as these insights that I've found should show to be correct. Many stolen directly from other people, some taken from the Bible, but most extrapolated from what other people have said. Now, I know a lot of people would say, "Oh, Christians are supposed to love everyone, and you should never hurt or kill people. You should love them." Which means that I need to define love before we go any further. Love is merely desiring the good of the other person. That's important to know because protecting the innocent and justice are two of the greatest goods there are, which means that when there's a person who would harm an innocent or has harmed an innocent, protection and justice say the greatest good in that case is violent punishment against the offender. Given that justice and punishment is the greatest good for all parties involved, wishing and or inflicting appropriate punishment or using violence to stop harm is actually for the good of the offender as well. This means that you can genuinely love a person and desire good for them while flipping the switch on the electric chair. Here's evidence that the majority of people don't understand this. Just 2 weeks ago, an extremely well-meaning but misguided person saw me playing with my oldest boy with toy pistols. This good Christian lady looked me right in the face and said, "You shouldn't let him shoot people. Have him shoot deers instead." I wasn't interested in an argument, so I said nothing, but I'm going to address that concept right now. This is a pistol. It is for self-defense. This is an intermediate power rifle. It's a weapon of war. And this is a bolt-action rifle, and its primary use is hunting. Notice that of the three main types of weapons that I put out there, 2 of them are designed specifically for shooting people, which you must be prepared to do as a lover of people and a defender of innocent life. So, in the Old Testament, God commanded violence over and over again, and in the New Testament, he said, "He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one." Now, what's important to note here is that Jesus said that in Luke 22 and verse 36. But just a few verses down in Luke 22:50, Peter used his sword that Jesus told him to have, but at the wrong time and in the wrong way. Peter was a rough man and a good man, the man handpicked by Jesus himself to be the human head of the church. and even he, being such a good and just man, did violence in the wrong way at the wrong time, though Peter isn't necessarily to be blamed, as in literally any other circumstance than Jesus' arrest, his actions would have been absolutely appropriate. Violence is the most extreme solution to a problem. And what I mean by that is, when violence is not appropriate in a certain situation, it is likely to be the worst moral evil at that time. But if violence is appropriate, it is likely to be the greatest moral good in that time. If you don't believe that violence is a moral good when it is appropriate, look at the Crusades. 400 years of innocent people being slaughtered by barbaric people, and eventually the church had enough of it and sent men over to put a stop to it. That was a moral good. Another example, let's say that a man raped and or killed some people and was executed. The violence done against that man at his execution was a moral good. That's the first reason why it's important. God has ordered us as protectors of our families and countries and of the innocent in general to be prepared to do violence, but he obviously doesn't want us to do violence when it's not appropriate. Many people just teach their sons not to be violent, which is at best silly and at worst dangerous and wrong. I suppose most of this video is going to be talking about how not only is violence not an inherent moral wrong, pacifism is much more likely to be a moral wrong than violence is. Speaking of which, I have an example of a time when choosing not to do violence was an active moral wrong. Kermit Gosnell. Kermit Gosnell was an abortion doctor who is currently in prison. Not only did he kill at least one of the women who came to him, but regardless of what you think about abortion, you will surely agree that murdering between 5 and over 100, he was tried for 5, but his staff insisted the number was at least 100, babies after they were born. And then a 15-year-old girl came in and told him she had changed her mind and no longer wanted the abortion. His response was to forcibly tear her clothes off, force her onto the bed, sedate her, and perform the abortion without her consent. And I told you about all of his deeds so you can know that he wasn't executed. The fact that this man was allowed to live is one of the greatest moral evils of our lifetime. So what does it mean if you raise your boys to believe that violence is morally wrong and they grow up to believe that? Well, for one thing, they'll not have the opportunity as adults to join a violent profession like the military, the police, or any other such, and what's worse, they will be inadequate protectors of their families. A pacifist, a true pacifist, who refuses to engage in any violence is a weak man, and we are called to be strong men. How many times throughout the Bible has God said, "Be strong and of good courage"? Not all weak men are pacifists. Actually, most weak men are significantly more violent than strong men. But all pacifists are weak men, and here's why I say that. Any reason you may come up with to refuse to do violence when the time is appropriate, whether that time is in defense of family, country, or an innocent, and yes, defending your own life is defending your family by extension, since you are the family provider and defender, is indicative of weakness, whether your refusal comes from a position of cowardice, a position of "that's not my fight," or worst of them all, a position of believing it is wrong to do violence in any circumstance. The reason why those last two are so bad is because it's a shift in responsibility away from yourself. I'm not risking my life for that person. It was tragic that had happened, but if I had intervened, I would be no better than them. Obviously, you don't need to go around being violent all the time, but the fact remains that if you would watch another human being get brutally beaten, raped, kidnapped, or killed, you are as despicable as the perpetrator. You are a weak man, and the person who refused to help out of cowardice is more justifiable than you. Basically, there are two ways in the context of violence to make sure your boys are absolutely worthless. First, if you don't teach them the appropriate time and place to violence, and to use violence as a protector of innocent life, you might have boys that grow up to be worthless criminals. And second, if you don't teach them that violence is a moral good in the right circumstances, and they grow up not knowing their duty to violence in those times, or they believe that violence is always a moral wrong, you might have boys that grow up to be worthless pacifists. And some lesser reasons why it's good to teach your boys how to be violent is this. First thing, they will learn by wrestling with you or their brothers or their friends or whatever the virtue of fortitude. They will be strong, and they will never give up even when they're losing. And another potential reason why you should teach your kids how to be violent is that, like I just said, one of the ways you teach them this early on is through rough and tumble playing. And actually, clinicians have found that depriving young boys of this kind of play leads to parts of their brain being underdeveloped, and that's where so many diagnoses of ADHD come from. Which is one of the many reasons not to send your kid to, well, public school especially, but really any school where they will sit in a modern classroom setting for 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day. So really what I'm trying to get at is that boys are naturally violent, and that's potentially very good, but you need to teach them how to channel that violence into being good protectors, or else it could be very bad. But as always, I am Sean Moberly, and these are my Seananigans.
You should mention that that you're not just prescribing that children should play with guns.
Yeah, well, I'm also saying that specifically they're playing with toys.
Right.
I specified that it was a toy gun that we were playing with.
I know, but children don't really know the difference.
Yeah, but adults do. I'm talking to adults.
That's true.
This isn't a video for children.